Looks like I have to re-record this. Sorry, it looks like the file must have been corrupted or something. But I did make a video about the first part of Chapter 3 of Utilitarianism. Let me just try to condense that now. The main question here is the ultimate sanction of the principle of utility. And I think if you understand what he means by that, you understand much of what's going on in this chapter. What gives the principle of utility its sanction? Well, first of all, I think we need to kind of restate the greatest happiness principle that appears in the beginning, or not the beginning, the second chapter, from a statement about what the good is. The good is happiness, or the good is pleasure, to what our duties are. That is, that we're not just saying that the good is happiness and that a moral action is judged according to its consequences for human happiness, causing unhappiness, but that it's a rule that we must follow. That is the greatest happiness rule, you might say. Do that which results, in your estimation, in the greatest net effect of happiness. And it can also be, do that which causes the least amount of unhappiness. If we think of that as a rule, then we can understand what he means by sanction of the principle of utility. What gives it its force? Why should I? What is it that obligates me to follow that rule, is what Mill is asking. If the basic, let's say, rule of all morality is do that which has the greatest net consequences in terms of happiness, that is, when you average everything out, causes the most amount of happiness and the least amount of unhappiness, the most amount of pleasure, the least amount of pain. What is it that gives it its force? Why should I follow it, is really what he's asking. And it's a pretty interesting answer, I think. What makes it obligatory? Well, the first thing he points out is that every moral philosophy is going to face this question. That is not a difficulty that is particular to utilitarianism, but asking what the sanction is, what you might say gives its principles obligatory force, is a question that all moral philosophies, no matter what they base themselves on, will have to deal with. And it's a very difficult question, as he says. And one of the phenomena that he's pointing out is that when you try to reduce morality, and rightly, to some basic principles, or in this case, basically one basic principle, you find that there's a kind of a disappointment, because the basic principle is supposed to show how all of our normal moral beliefs, more particular moral beliefs, like don't lie, don't steal, don't hurt another person, why they have the force that they do. But as he points out in the first paragraph, when he talks about the theorem and the corollaries, he's using a mathematical analogy. If the theorem is the basic idea that happiness should be increased, and the corollaries are things like don't kill, don't steal, don't hurt, then the corollaries seem more convincing to us than the basic principle, or what he calls the original theorem. That is, there's a kind of a disappointment in moral philosophy insofar as the principles that it offers to support our normal moral beliefs are often seem to have less power than those moral beliefs just hanging out there. And he says that is the truth. Says this right in the middle. The supposed corollaries seem to have more binding force than the original theorem. The superstructure seems to stand better without than with what is represented as its foundation. So sort of, okay, well, isn't he undermining his own moral philosophy? Well, I think what he's saying is that all moral philosophies will face this question, that, people's moral beliefs are really a matter of psychology. And psychology is a matter of let's say, our habits of thinking. And it really comes down to education for him. That is, if the greatest happiness principle itself seems to have less force for us than our ordinary sort of particular moral beliefs, that's really due to our education. We've had those other things drilled into us. We have not had the greatest happiness principle drilled into us. It may be something that we've never even heard before, or we've never even thought of morality in that way. So, in asking, though, what, okay, do that which causes happiness, avoid those things which cause unhappiness. Well, what would be the motive to follow that? One of the things he points out is that externally there are motives, what he calls external sanctions. The truth of the matter is that if you're good to other people and you do things that make other people happy and you avoid doing things that cause them suffering and unhappiness, people will like that. There are external rewards for doing that. And it's also true the other way around. That is, that if you do things that cause suffering to other people, people don't like it. And you are often punished for it in one way or another. So there are external sanctions. But as far as internal sanctions, like why should I follow this, irrespective of its effects on me, the question is more difficult, and it really is what he calls a matter of conscience. We can think of any number of reasons to follow the greatest happiness principle for selfish or egotistical reasons. We can be said to do good to others because we like the effects of it, because people reward us for it. But that doesn't seem, enough. That we should follow the greatest happiness principle simply because we recognize it to be right, and certainly that would be something that would appeal more to Kant, although Kant would reject all of utilitarianism as a basis for morality. Well, he says something quite interesting about that, about internal sanctions, and it's here on page 3. The ultimate sanction, therefore, of all morality, it's down here, external motives apart, being a subjective feeling in our own minds. I see nothing embarrassing to those whose standard is utility in the question, what is the sanction of that particular standard? Like, what is it that gives that standard, the utilitarian standard, its force? Again, all moral philosophies have to deal with this difficult question, he says. And it really is a matter of subjective feeling. Either that principle appeals to us so that the violation of that principle would seem terrible to us, or it doesn't. And I suppose that people who don't have that feeling, that subjective feeling that the happiness of themselves and others is an important thing to promote, that utilitarianism, they could take it or leave it. But you won't be able to base it on anything more certain or sure than subjective feeling. He discusses on page 4 those who would like to base morality in a transcendental fact, something beyond human psychology, some truth about the universe that simply needs to be acknowledged, something beyond people's subjective feeling. And I think Kant tried to do that. But Mill says it'll fail, that you won't be able to do it, that the sanction for the greatest happiness principle comes from people's feeling, or it comes from nothing. And he argues that, the greatest happiness principle is certainly conducive to human nature, or human nature is conducive to the greatest happiness principle. It seems to fit in with our psychology. It seems to fit in with human nature, and it can be promoted. And indeed, he sees that the whole progress of civilization, the progress of the human race, is more and more recognizing that principle in an egalitarian way, that all people matter, all people's happiness matters, and all people irrespective of their place in society or what group they belong to, that all people's happiness should have an equal importance and should be promoted to the greatest degree possible. But all this ultimately depends upon what he calls conscience, but conscience depends upon feeling and psychology. So really, for Mill, it's a matter of education to nurture a feeling for the greatest happiness principle is one of the most important things that we can do for a human being in terms of educating them.